Yeah. So, good morning.
Morning.
To start off with, would you like to say your name and where you are?
Sure. My name is Moin Subhani, and I'm in Toronto, Canada.
Hmm. And the first fun question is, who are you? Who are you as a person, as a human being? Your values, passions, interests, qualities, whatever you'd like.
So that's a very broad question. So when I think about that question, the first thing that comes up for me is storyteller. From an early age, as far back as I can remember, I wanted to be a writer. That was my initial impulse. And while I haven't published something yet, um, I feel that I've really embraced that initial instinct of being a storyteller. That's how I understand myself and the work I do today as a psychotherapist.
Hmm.
Um, in terms of helping my clients tell their stories, and also as a therapist showing up, and I see myself also as a bit of a maverick in terms of I'm a student of the world. So I am interested in various spiritual traditions, um, various lots of things, mythology, um, the world. The world attracts me. So I feel that as a maverick or even as a storyteller, my task is to tie in all these various loose threads that I see and present them back um, to the people around me, and specifically as a therapist to my clients, so that they can understand themselves um, in the therapy process. So when I look at it that way, in terms of the storyteller lens, I see myself as a creative artist, and really looking to live and embody creativity and artistry as a way of life. Um, so I don't have anything published. I'm not a paid artist per se, but for me, artistry is a way of life. It's how do I show up? How do I wake up? Right? How do I move through the world? So for me, it's this way, it informs me in terms of how I live and breathe. Um, I'm a brown man, Muslim background or born Muslim, and this is deeply influenced by growing up in Toronto, the son of immigrant parents. This has given me this is a very unique vantage point for me in this growing up in the city. In the time period I did, my parents, or at least when I was growing up, it was quite often for me to be the only brown kid or the only immigrant kid in a classroom. Um, in fact, when I went to university in the class of 1000, I was one of three people of color. So, yeah, so um, this informs me. Like, I remember sitting in this first year class and doing a scan and being like, whoa, there's only three of us.
Wow. That's not the Canada I remember. It's not the Canada they sold me, the multicultural tapestry.
Well, it is, but I was not in Toronto, right? I was in Waterloo, going to Laurier, and it was 1996. But still, that wasn't too long ago, right?
No, no, not at all.
So
Hmm.
this has given me a lens. The fact that I do this type of, or as a young person, I did this type of counting. It informs how I show up and understand the world. And so I see myself as both a pioneer in terms of being sort of the first to navigate my way through this, um, and a bit of an agitator. So I see myself, my job, to bring attention to the system, to bring attention, having navigated the system, navigated life, navigated the city, to my activism is to point out things, and so I do that socially in friendships, um, publicly, and as a therapist. So for me, it's about therapy work is not just the personal, but community based. So I also see myself as a brother, not just to my family, but a brother in my community, and that really informs my work as a therapist. So that was my rambling
Oh
answer.
no, that's a very phenomenological sort of multi-level answer. Very interesting. And I'm wondering if you identify a particular value that stands out that you sort of orient around or towards.
um, yes, I'm going to appeal to an ancient or an old Hindu mantra and translate it to truth, God, and beauty. Um, these are my values. So truth is, I live and die for the truth. So it informs me, it's how I show up. And my clients will assert this or say this. The first thing all my clients say is, "You're so blunt." So it's one thing that people can count on and believe that I will show up in truth. Um, God for me denotes a spirituality. The First Nations, I've been taught, call God or the divine the great mystery. So for me, that's would be another way we talk about it, right? The great mystery has always interested me as a child, and still does, and it shows up actively in my work. And beauty. I'm all about, I talked about art in the beginning, and for me, life is an aesthetic choice. It's an aesthetic question. It's not a moral one. And so for me, beauty and this quest for beauty and appreciating beauty informs me.
Okay. So another question would be, what comes to mind as a particular event or as a set of circumstances in your life that you would say has really informed who you are?
I would say growing up. I talked about being brown, South Asian, um, boy, man, growing up, 80s, 90s, Toronto. This has left a deep imprint on me. It's how I understand the world. And also, not just having gone through a set of experiences, but having navigated them and figured something out. So when I talk about in particular, my 20s, it was a very dark period for me. It was really, I still hadn't found myself as a person, and navigating family expectations and this experience of growing up in a certain family and having certain experiences there, and then melding into grander society, right? And what that means was, I think, was a life defining journey for me. And having figured it out and made it out alive, my task for me is, or my calling is, to show the way to others. Um, and especially this year, this time, I feel it was so pertinent. It's so pertinent. Um, my my practice is pretty much full. I've received so many inquiries from clients with this particular, looking for a person of color to do therapy work, to explore trauma, to explore the shit, but from this particular vantage point, right? Because it is rare right now.
It is. It is. And another question for you, maybe before we get into the therapeutic field,
Sure.
would be who you identify, who another human being in this world, or maybe not in this world anymore, has influenced your life or your person.
I'm going to pick two.
Sure.
I'll say my mother. Um, so when during my training, in my first year, we do a retreat, and it's a very powerful, cathartic experience or climax of the training. And I went to the retreat, went back, and called my mother, and I said, I've given you a lot of shit. I've told you everything you've done wrong about raising me. But what I haven't told you is that
I missed that last part. Your audio is.
what I haven't told you is I learned to love from you. So, so while she's my mom, so naturally I have at times difficulties with her. But I learned empathy. I learned how to love from my mom. And that's a core skill for me in terms of how I show up today.
You literally have a giant heart on you. So, yeah.
Yeah. So this is her legacy. And yeah, I honor that it comes from my mother. And the second person I'd like to honor is actually a professor from university. He was a mentor of sorts. And while I was in a really deep and dark place, he planted so many seeds in me. So in terms of like my intellectual understanding of the world, I really feel indebted to him in terms of what he introduced me to. In fact, even my relationship with Gestalt is linked to him. I remember he came into class one day and he said, Gestalt therapy is the answer. And I remember just, I tucked that away and
make a note of that. Yeah.
Gestalt therapy is the answer. So I was pointed in the right direction from a long time ago. And yeah.
Was this in a psychology class, or was this just a random kind of tack? Or
I'm a philosophy major. I did my undergrad in philosophy at Laurier, and he was a philosophy professor I took many classes of, and I really owe my my spirit, my spiritual, but my intellectual bent to the introduction he gave me in those years.
Do you want to say his name, or?
Yeah, Dr. Bob Litke.
Oh, okay. Because we say that if it's something negative, please leave their names out of it. But this sounds like something very nice.
Yeah, Dr. Bob Litke. So I owe to my mom and or at least some of the roots to my brain to Dr. Litke.
Okay, interesting. And one more question. You've talked about being a brown man, but I wonder if we take one part of that, if you'd like to say anything about how you experience yourself within your gender or as a man or in your masculinity.
I love this question. So as a queer man, being masculinity has also been this really complicated concept for me, and something that's also has been a lifelong journey or has aspects of that. So masculinity was this idea that I really shied away from. I had a lot of difficulty with, a lot of anger for, and my journey as a man actually is, we were talking about heart, and as cheesy as it sounds, was actually opening and discovering my heart. So my journey in my 20s was really connecting with it, having a heart. It was as simple as I remember in my late 20s watching a movie and crying and being like, having a sense of achievement around that, that I felt human in that. And so I do feel like I have a sense of purpose in that I've said to a few friends for a while, and during my training, that I felt my job was to awaken the hearts of men, to
Mm.
really help men come into their hearts, to see that as a fundamental issue with men when I work with men. So whenever male clients come, when I ask them about feeling, how does that feel? It's an uphill battle in relation to the female clients. So in terms of being male and it's to really support um, for X, Y reason, good reason, but regardless, it's happened. So I really feel that masculinity is something that I don't want to say reclaiming because then for me that takes to sort of this problematic territory. But I would rather say redefining, actually. Redefining the experience. So about 4 years ago, I went to this retreat and we had a men's circle night. And that was such a profound evening for me, where all these men, and only I think two of us were queer, so the rest were, straight macho type. And they showed up and they were all willing to be vulnerable. And the conversation that night was we talked about fatherhood and our experience with fathers. And of the 10 men, only one had a positive story about fatherhood. Uh, yeah, the other nine, all of us had these really painful stories about missing a father. And only one did. So that to me really struck out in terms of masculinity, community, brotherhood again, and um, fatherhood leadership is a part of that. So again, for me, it comes back to redefining and thinking back to artistry and being a creative way. For me, it shows up again. How do I live and redefine being a
Hmm. Okay.
man?
Hmm. Hmm. So, doing a little bit of a switch now, I guess I would ask how you actually came into Gestalt. I mean, you heard it was the answer, but how did you actually get here?
So I heard it was the answer in my early 20s, and it's actually funny. When I moved where I lived in my early 20s, when I first moved out, I lived down the street from the Gestalt Institute,
Oh,
where it was, and I
in a
was
bad
so
neighborhood. Bad neighborhood.
so I knew where it was, and I was swear to God, I was frightened to walk up the steps. I couldn't bring myself to walk up the answer steps, and so I knew where the answer was for a good 15 years before I finally dared to walk the steps. Um,
Hmm.
and there was some synergy. I happened to find a therapist who was a Gestalt therapist. I worked with her for a couple of years. A colleague randomly happened to enroll in the Gestalt Institute. And so I saw that happening sort of around me. And then I was like, okay, it's time.
It's closing in on you.
Yeah. So my my initial therapy experience with Gestalt was um, life changing, transformative to say the least. And my initial desire to go to the Institute and train was simply to learn what was being done to me. I really wanted to understand this method and this approach and this way of being. And I had this idea that it was this magical thing that I was going to learn. But really, what I learned was simply how to be myself and sit with another person. Um,
It's pretty magical.
It
Come
is very
on.
magical, but I thought there was wands involved.
No, that's the doctoral program.
Exactly, yeah. So, yeah, the magic of it in terms of my life experience and how it really helped me, um, again, discover that artist way. It really, for me, unplugged things that had been so stagnant for so long that it was exciting.
Hmm. Hmm. So, what is it in particular? I mean, some people have like a favorite theory, some people have a couple words that are just like, it's this. What is Gestalt for you? What is it that attracts you or keeps you there?
For me, it comes down to I and thou. For me, when we talk about the magic, and when we talked about sitting with yourself and with somebody else, that is I and thou. And for me, it is a profound, magical, mystical experience that can be fleeting for a moment with a client, or my barista at Starbucks, or it can extend for a while. But for me, it's this meeting. It's this magical meeting between people. Um, there's so much possibility where I never know what's going to happen when my client sits down in front of me. Um, and just simply attending to myself, them, and meeting always results in this amazing, crazy, cool adventure.
That's true. So, would you say that you feel like you're part of a Gestalt community? Does that mean anything to you?
I think I'm discovering my Gestalt community. So I just finished my training program last year, and so I have a community that I emerged from having trained, colleagues. And there's also a transition from having gone from this sort of training formation to now we're practitioners in the real world, and we have full practices and lives, and so it's how do, and especially this year, the pandemic. So that's now forced us to redefine um, community means, how we show up in community, right? Literally. Um, so in terms of Gestalt, um, and discovering the global nature of it, especially in terms of even just preparing for this and writing this project. Um, really appreciating that. So yes, there's a product training just for the people I'm trained with, but this is it's a global way of being in terms of um, practitioners, etc. Um, so I have this sort of almost a dawning awareness of that and interest in connecting with that, and still in beginning stages, but that's where my sort of my answer in terms of community goes, my thoughts go.
Hmm. Okay. So another question is, what have you run up against that you would consider significant challenges? And you can answer this if you still have the energy to go into the Gestalt aspects of your life or as a person in a separate way, however you.
Hmm. I'll say two things. So first, to face the tremendous level of suffering that lives in the world, that exists and that shows up, and to bear witness. For me, is the um, uh, show up and do it, but to be reminded and to see it um, can be quite hard, and requires continual support and internal work um, to show up. That would be number one. For me, number two is this really delicate balancing act, especially when I talk about being brown, South Asian, and my practice is predominantly people of color, immigrant backgrounds. For me, it's this delicate balancing act of the question of um, I versus we. So when I look at Gestalt, and I think Chris Pearls actually explicitly says it in the introduction, that this the therapy he's devising is meant for a Western man with a Western understanding. And so when he frames it that way, and it is explicit, right? So Gestalt really is about me. How am I doing? The we comes after in terms
Right.
of checking in. So there is a certain bent in this approach, or it can come across that way. And many of my clients show up with this strong family community impulse. And the questions I raise are really almost like, oh my God, that's selfish. And I say yes, and I preach the virtue of selfishness. But there is this delicate act in terms of also honoring where they come from, the experiences they have, the values they have, and not to whitewash it, Western wash it, Moin wash it, and to respect their way. I feel that Gestalt still gives me that ability in that I'm constantly, even this way of thinking is embedded in Gestalt, that we have to ask, what's happening? What am I doing in this field? How am I impacting the client? So I am given those tools, but it's a constant negotiation, especially in this time. What I'm realizing is I can't rely on all the answers I got from my training, but I can use the tools I got, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. And I mean, when you talk about Pearl's framing it in a Western way, it's not explicit, but it is a white framing.
Exactly.
I mean, Western is a lovely way of assuming that everyone in the West is white, but not quite the case.
Exactly. So then what do I do when I show up with different values, right? And then how do I navigate this? And this comes up even in very simple things for my clients in terms of like navigating workplace and how do I create friendships, right? These are really meaningful and serious investigations for people, especially coming from abroad. And when we talked about community and masculinity, all of these things start intertwining. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. And another question would be, I wouldn't say it's the flip side. Sometimes I say it's the flip side, but it's a fake dichotomy. What you identify as some of the highlights of your experience or some of your greatest moments. And I mean, this can be clinically with a client or personally, however you'd like.
The highlight of my work with clients has been actually moments of dance, where music and spontaneity come into our sessions. So there was one particular session where a client came in and she said, I wish we could dance. And I said, well, we can. Why can't we? And it so happened that the last song I had on my phone was Whitney Houston's I Just Want to Dance with Somebody. And so I pressed play, I put it on, and we danced. And it was beautiful. And I segued into therapy, so I was able to we had this moment, and then eventually I started asking her questions, like let's notice where we are, etc. And it moved into that. But for me, it stays as this really cherished memory of how the power of Gestalt, in terms of being able to take a spontaneous request, I wish you could dance, and then actually have a really meaningful exploration of it after. That dance in itself can be a powerful teacher.
That sounds like fun. It sounds like good therapeutic fun as well.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, I want to keep inventing more questions, but I won't. I will kind of stick to it. And the last one that I really have is, where are you going with this? What direction do you see yourself taking? Where's your interest leading you? And on the other side, where do you think Gestalt is or could be going in the future?
I love this. I love your last question about where I see Gestalt going in the future. And I'll start there and then piggyback. Um, I honestly believe, if you can't tell from this whole interview, the power of Gestalt.
Oh my
um,
God, really?
I think that it can really be a very powerful therapeutic modality for transformation. And for me, there's these stages in it. So it begins with working on oneself, being able to tolerate being oneself, and then showing up with another to discover, how to be with another. And then the third stage is when I'm comfortable with myself and those around me, becomes a question of community, the world around outside, right? And so I think, especially after this year, for me, community is my concern, my interest. Um, and um, so that's where my next steps are, both. So from a Gestalt perspective, I think Gestalt has quite a lot to offer, especially in terms of topics like race, sexuality, um, these really hot topics today. Um, I think Gestalt offers a really unique lens that's not really understood. So many of my clients come in and say, "What is this?" and have no idea. Everyone understands CBT, and that CBT has had such a great PR, if you will, right? Where it's so well understood, but Gestalt isn't. So I see that as a possibility in its future and its way forward. And in terms of myself, as my practice verges on being full, I wonder and ask myself how I can share with the world, or share what I have to offer in different ways. So my interest is in actually similar platforms like this, and trying to find different ways to share my message. So joining your YouTube channel, this research project. In fact, I'm launching my own YouTube channel, Love Evolution, and it's going to be a sharing of things that I've learned. So meditation offerings, talks, conversations with other therapists, people, exploring relevant topics, and hopefully giving people takeaways so that therapy, you don't necessarily have to go to therapy or the therapist's office to get these insights. So that's my interest.
That sounds very exciting and goes with the storyteller. It goes with an incredible voice. You have just a wonderful voice.
Oh, thank you.
So is there anything that you feel like we've missed? Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I think this was pretty comprehensive. I covered the points that I wanted to share, so I feel complete.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to say, I am sitting here in my whiteness and I'm aware of it. And I didn't directly respond to a lot of things that you said. Part of it is because I'm figuring that stuff out a bit in my own process, but also because I wanted to hear what you wanted to say. So I'm just aware of that I didn't engage with you very much, but I kind of, yeah, you've left me thinking about quite a few things as well. So
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that. And you set the expectation regarding the conversation, so I was okay with your level of engagement.
okay, all right. Well, thank you, and I really appreciate your time. It was lovely to meet you.
It was
So
lovely.
if it's okay with you, we'll leave it here.
Sounds good.
Okay, thanks.